Hello and welcome to a new tutorial. Thank you for stopping by. You are welcome if you are a new viewer, and also you're welcome if you're a returning viewer. Please subscribe if you're yet to subscribe to my channel. So today's tutorial is on how to draft a classic Princess Dart pencil dress. This is a requested video, so please watch to the end of this video because it's going to be very detailed. So I've ruled out some lines, my vertical measurements, and I'm just labeling them, and I will take you through the lines I already have on my paper. So the first line I have is my start line, which also acts as my shoulder line. So from that line, the start line, to 8 inches is the chest line, and to 9 inches is the bust point line, and then to 15 inches is the waistline, and I have 23 inches as the hip line. And then the length of the dress I'm drafting is 38 inches plus 1.5 inches hemming allowance. So the first thing I'm going to do will be to get the shoulder slope, and for that I will use the 3-inch 8-inch standard for shoulder slope. I've noted the 3-inch and 8 inches points on the shoulder line, and from the 8 inches point I came down by 1 inch, and I'm connecting to the 3 inches point I noted. Then also on the shoulder line, I'm going to impute half of my shoulder measurement, which is 7 inches, and I'll also impute that on the chest line. 7 inches on the shoulder line and on the chest line. And from the shoulder line, I'm going to connect straight up to the 7 inches I noted on the chest line, but I'll stop at the shoulder slope line. Then I would measure what I have, the straight line I ruled from the shoulder slope to the chest line. I would find the midpoint of that, and from the midpoint I'll come in by 1/2 inch. And then on the chest line, I'm going to impute quarter of my bust measurement, and these points will now form the front armhole. From the bust measurement on the chest line to the 1/2 inch I came in by, and then up to the shoulder slope line, and that will form my front armhole. So after connecting for the front armhole, I'm going to take my dart. So to do that, I'm going to need my nipple to nipple measurement, also known as the bust span measurement. For me, my nipple to nipple measurement is 8 inches, and divided into 2 will give me 4 inches. So to that 4 inches, I added 1/2 inch joining allowance because I'm adding all allowances to this pattern. So I would be imputing 4.5 inches on the bust point line, waistline, hip line, and to the hem of my paper. So I'm going to connect these lines. The 4 inches point I've noted on these lines, I'm going to connect it from the bust point down to the length of the dress I'm drafting. So that is the line I'm ruling as shown. So on this newly ruled line, I'm going to take 1/2 inch on both sides of this line from the waistline. So I'm taking 1/2 inches that, and from the bust point, I'll come down by 1 inch. Then I will connect what I have, the dart I've taken from the waistline, to the 1 inch I came down by from the bust point. So I'm connecting the 1/2 inch I took on both sides. I'm connecting it to the 1 inch below the bust point line. And then from the hip line, I'm going to come up by 2 inches. I came up by 2 inches, and then I'm going to connect the dart leg from the waistline to the 2 inches I came up by. Now I have taken the waist that I would, this is a princess that's armhole princess that, so I would also take the armhole that. So for that, from the shoulder slope, I would measure what I have for my armhole. I would measure to where my armhole curve stopped. I would take that measurement very well, and when I measured, I had 8.75 inches. So I would fold my tape into two to get the midpoint of this measurement. So where I have a crease on my tape is the midpoint. So from the shoulder slope, I would note that midpoint. I would note that on the armhole curve. From there, I will then come down by 1/2 inch since I'm adding my allowance on this pattern. So I came down for joining allowance by 1/2 inch. after getting half of what I had on the armhole curve. So I would now use the French curve to connect this point I now noted on the armhole to the bust point line, just as I'm demonstrating. So I'll connect from that point down to the bust point line. Then I'm going to take a dart from this line I made. I'm going to take ½ inch on both sides of this line. So I've measured ½ inch on either side of the line. So I'm going to connect these ½ inches down also to the bust point line. I'm connecting them just as shown. So this will be cut off. That will be the dart from the armhole. So since this would be cut off, to avoid shortage, I'm going to measure what I will cut off, which is 1 inch. ½ inch equals 1 inch. So I'm going to impute 1 inch and add it to the last dart leg close to the chest line. So I've replaced that. I'll also measure what will be cut out from the chest line and also replace that on the chest line as shown. So I'm going to reconnect, and this will be my new armhole. Where I've connected from the 1 inch I went up by to the chest line will be the new armhole. Now that I've taken all the necessary darts, I'm going to place my circumference measurements. So I've already placed my quarter of my bust measurement. So on the waistline, I'm going to impute quarter of my waist measurement, which is 7.5 inches, plus the 1 inch that I will be cutting out from the waist, making it 8.5. Then I'm going to add extra 1 inch for joining the center front and the center side front together. I've also added that on the chest line as well, 1 inch for joining, because after cutting the darts I will have 3 pieces, so I'll need to join the side to the center. So on the hip, I've also imputed quarter of my hip measurements plus 1 inch for joining the center front and the center side front together. So I'm connecting from the chest line to the waistline with a straight ruler, and I'm using my pattern master, the curved part, to connect from the waist to the hip. Then on the hem, what measurements I'm going to place on the hem will be the total measurements I have on the hip line. I'm going to subtract, you can either subtract between 1 and 1.5 inches from that measurement and place it on the hem line. So for me, I will subtract 1.25 inches from what I have on the hip line and impute that on the hem line, on the full length line. So I'm going to connect using a straight ruler from the length of the dress to the hip line. So guys, this is it. I'm almost through with this. So you can decide to draft yours without adding allowances, and then add the allowance when transferring to your fabric. But I'm going to add all my allowances to this. So I would add 1.5 inches side seam allowance to both the chest line, to the waistline, the hip line, and the length of this dress, and I would connect just the way I connected the main measurements. So if you're watching and you're yet to subscribe to my channel, please take out time to click on the subscribe button, and also don't forget to click the notification bell beside the subscribe button so that you'll be notified every time I upload a new video. So also on this channel, I actually have a video on how to cut and sew a classic princess dart pencil dress on this channel, and I'll drop the link in the description box so you can check that out. So this is it guys, I'm almost through with this. So the darts will be cut off. I'm labeling that is my seam allowance for easy understanding, and I'll cut out the shaded part, that's the dart. So remember that from the bust point I came down by 1 inch, from the hip line I came up by 2 inches for my dart, and on the armhole I took ½ inch on both sides and also replaced that 1 inch to avoid shortage. So before you cut out, make sure to check all the measurement that everything is complete. For the neckline, I will use a standard neckline of 3 inches neck width and 3 inches neck depth, but if you're a big size you can increase that to 3.5 by 3.5. I'll also remember to add my shoulder joining allowance because I want to add all allowances to this pattern. So I'll add that, and that would be all about drafting the front part. So this is it, guys. Please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. I would quickly go into drafting the back part so that we can see the difference between the front and the back before I cut out. So I will not cut this out until I'm done drafting the back part. For the back part, I've ruled out all necessary vertical lines except for the bust point line because there is no bust at the back, and I'm also ruling out 1.5 inches for my zipper allowance, and all my measurements will start from this 1.5 inches line I just ruled out. So on the shoulder line, I'm going to take the note the 3 inch 8 inches point for shoulder slope, and for the shoulder slope at the back I came down by 1/2 inch at the 8 inches point and connected to the 3 inches point because this is the back part. I would also place 7 inches on the shoulder line and on the chest line like I did for the front, and I'll connect the point from the shoulder slope to the chest line. Then I'm going to impute quarter of my bust measurement on the chest line. I would find the midpoint of the line from the shoulder slope to the chest line. I would note that, and then I'll connect and curve for my armhole curve. For the back armhole, I did not come in by 1/2 inch. I just connected. So that is it for the back part for the armhole. Then I'm going to impute 4.5 inches, which is my half of my bust span measurement plus 1/2 inch. I will impute that on the chest line, the waist line, the hip line, and the length of the pattern. So I'm going to connect these points. Note that there is no bust point line because there is no bust on the back part. So on the waistline, I'm going to take 1/2 inches that like I did in the front. I came down from the chest line by 1 inch, and from the hip line I came up by 2 inches, and then on the waistline I took 1/2 inch on both sides of the bust span line. So I'm connecting the dart legs from the waistline to the 1 inch I came down from the chest line and down to the 2 inches I came up from the hip line. So the dart on the waist is already taken care of. So I would also measure my armhole curve. I'll measure it, what I have. I would find the midpoint of that, and from the midpoint I came down by 1/2 inch as well, like I did in the front. So I'm going to connect this point now down to the 1 inch I came down by from the chest line. You can see how I placed my French curve, and I'm going to connect this point from the point I noted on the armhole curve down to the 1 inch I came down by before taking my dart for the back part. So that is how I connected. And here I'm not going, since there is no bust, I'm not going to take any dart on the armhole area. So to avoid shortage, I will just go up by 1/2 inch and connect it, extend the line on the armhole, and then I'm going to reconnect it back to form a new armhole for the back. So I'm done with the taking of that for the back part. So I'm going to impute the 1 inch I did like I did for the front for joining the center back and the side back together. So I added that on the chest line. On the waistline, I will impute quarter of my waist measurement plus 1 inch I will cut out for the dart, and 1 inch for joining the front, the center, and the sides together. On the hip line, I'm imputing quarter of the hip measurement plus 1 inch for joining the side and the center together as well. So I'm connecting just like I did for the front part. And on the hem as well, I'm going to subtract 1.25 inches from what I have on the hip line, and I'm connecting just the same thing like I did for the front. So for the neckline, the neck width of the front and the back are the same, 3 inches, and for the neck depth is 1 inch for the back, 3 inches by 1 inch neckline, and I'm also taking the shoulder joining allowance just like I did for the front part. So to eliminate zip bulge at the waistline at the zipper allowance side, I came in by ½ inch and I'm connecting that to the chest line as I'm demonstrating, and down towards the hip line, as you can see. So to avoid shortage of the zipper allowance, I'm going to remeasure 1.5 inches from that ½ inch I am going to cut off, and I'm connecting back to the chest line and down towards the hip line. And to make sure that my measurement is complete at the side, I'm going to replace that ½ inch that will be cut off on the waistline. I connected back to the chest line and down towards the hip line, just as I'm showing you. So now that I've taken all these measurements, I'll go ahead and add the 1.5 inches side seam allowance that I add to the front part. So if you're someone who wants to work with 1 inch seam allowance, go ahead and take that as your side seam allowance, or whatever allowance you're comfortable with. So the shaded parts I would cut out, and I've labeled my zipper allowance and my seam allowance for easy understanding. So this is it for the front and the back. So the major difference between the front and the back is that there is that taken out from the armhole part of the front part, and there is also bust point line on the front, whereas these are not required for the back part. And also note that the center front will be cut on fold, while for the back I'll just have 2 pieces. So these are just the major differences. So I'll go ahead and cut this out. So I have other videos on how to make bustiers of different kinds: shoulder dart bustier, basque waist top, bustier top, how to make a princess dart bustier, and other 6 pieces blouse and all that. So I'll drop the link in the description box, and I also have other interesting videos you might be interested in, so check that out. And please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. So I've cut out the front part. I'm relabeling so that I can know what is for what, and I've labeled the center front as CF and the side front as SF. So this is the front part. This is what the front looks like. So I'll go ahead now and also cut the back part. So I'll just cut out the back part. So the beauty of this is that all allowances have been added. So if you're to cut on the fabric or transfer to the fabric, you just place your pattern on the fabric, pin them together, and just cut exactly what you have on the pattern on the fabric. Or if you did not add your allowances to the pattern, then you can then add your allowances on the fabric when transferring to fabric. So this is it, guys. I've cut out the back. I'll also label the center back as CB and the side back as SB, so that I would know what is for what. So thank you guys for watching. This is it on how you can draft your classic princess dart pencil dress. Please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed watching it, and check out my channel for other interesting videos, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.